Okay, welcome to Experience 2 for Entrepreneurship 621. This guided tutorial, these are meant that you get at the introduction to each experience, are meant to be my thoughts about the material, maybe introducing some examples that may not be in the reading, or just reinforcing the importance of some of the learning points, and in some ways kind of whetting your appetite to the material. In terms of Experience 2, we're jumping into we're getting beyond this idea of who entrepreneurs are and what they actually do, which is basically, as we talked about, so entrepreneurs are folks that take action, and specifically, entrepreneurs are people who take an idea and turn it into a business. Every business starts with an idea. So we're kind of now getting beyond this entrepreneur versus entrepreneurial thing that I kind of introduced in module 1, and this idea of risk taking, but entrepreneurs are just these people who take an idea and turn it into a business. It's that simple. They're people that are willing to venture into the unknown, take some measure of risk, and create something new. And in some cases, that something new is incredibly innovative. Or maybe even not incredibly innovative. It's just innovative in general. But it all starts with the idea. Every business starts as an idea. Without that idea, nothing comes next. So the question here is, do you have ideas? If every business starts as an idea, where do those ideas come from? And I think I mentioned previously that in dealing with the students in our entrepreneurship program, that probably about 80% of them, rough number, it's not exact, when they come to the program, they don't have any idea of what kind of business they want to start. It always shocks me, but it is what it is. And businesses start from all kinds of different experiences. As Garner Holt Productions, which is an animatronics company located in San Bernardino. Garner started that company really in his mind as a young man. He went to Disneyland with his parents. On the ride back from Disneyland, he tells the story, and he talks about, and he even uses sort of the visual of showing himself, leaning up over the back seat into the front seat to talk to his parents, and tells the story of how he was so moved by what he saw at Disneyland that he told his parents, that's what I want to do when I grow up. I want to build animatronic figures and theme show rides and all those kind of things. So the business for Garner Holt Productions started as an idea, an inspiration from Disneyland. Another local company located in Ontario, Vantage LED, really cool. They make these really cool LED signs, large-scale LED signs. And this started as an idea. Chris Ma, the founder, was working for another LED sign company, and he got this idea that I could do this better, more effectively, with better features, lower cost, better customer service, all these wonderful things. And so he said, yeah, that's my idea. I'm going to go do it. And he left and started his own company doing LEDs, and now they're an incredibly fast-growing company, Vantage LED over in Ontario. Tap Out, the mixed martial arts clothing company that had become so popular. I think it's still very popular, but was an idea. Charles Lewis Jr., the founder of the company, had this idea that he wanted to create a clothing company that would represent this emerging mixed martial arts sport. At the time, it was kind of an underground sport. There weren't as many people involved, but it was gaining popularity. And Charles and his friends looked around, and Charles in particular said, there's nothing really there for me to sort of wear a clothing and a style that represents the sport and the lifestyle that I love and aspire to. And so as a result, he created Tap Out. So it started with the idea of, I would really like to have clothing that represents, my sport and what I believe in. 510, that makes climbing shoes, basically. Charles Cole, was an avid climber, and wasn't satisfied with the type of shoes and the soles that they had in terms of grip and those kind of things, and and decided that, you know what, nobody's producing what I need. I'm going to produce it myself, and that led to 510. Lucas Oil Products, headquartered in Corona. Forrest Lucas started out as a truck driver. Then he had his own trucking firm. Had a small fleet of trucks, and at one point in time, as he described it, he was having truck maintenance problems, and the cost of maintaining the trucks was really kind of eating them alive. And he had to figure out a way to extend the life of his trucks and extend the life of the equipment through better lubrication. And over a period of trial and error, he came up with, located and developed a formula, a lubricant formula that extended the life of his trucks. And his colleagues in the industry were asking him how he did it. And he decided, maybe I'm onto something here. Maybe this is something I could sell to the industry. And voila, he creates Lucas Oil Products, very successful company. I'm not sure what their revenues are now, but it's in the hundreds of millions. And if you're a football fan, you know Lucas Oil from their sponsorship of the stadium in which the Indianapolis Colts play, which is the Lucas Oil Stadium. So the common thread for all of these really cool businesses is they all started as an idea. It was a seed in somebody's head, and it ultimately came to life through action and some risk taking, venturing into the unknown, uncertain of what the outcome would be, but it started as an idea. So that's where the real rub comes in, isn't it? Where do my ideas come from? As I talk to not just our students here, but a lot of people, that's the question that vexes them is, I really want to start a business, but I'm not sure what my ideas are, or where I can come up with ideas, or how I can come up with ideas. And I know, as I read through our introductions in this class, some people had already thought about ideas for a business, others weren't certain. So this identifying processes of coming up with ideas and sources of ideas, I think, becomes really, really important. And if every business starts as an idea, where do these ideas come from? And so when I'm teaching people how to start ideating, we have to start identifying the sources of where those ideas might come from, because that becomes the prompt, the inspiration, the context to start tapping into your inner creativity and your life experience. I'm going to take you through about probably about 8, I'm guessing, specific areas that I think ideas are hiding, so to speak. They're there. We just have to understand them, recognize them, tap into them. And the first is what we call pain points. Everybody has pain points. Everybody has things that bug them, that drive them nuts. Whether it's personally, professionally, doesn't matter. But they have a pain point. I talked a moment ago about Lucas Oil. Well, Lucas Oil was a problem. He was having a problem with maintenance costs, and he was trying to find a way to drive down the maintenance costs of his trucking fleet. The result was a lubricant that did that. And the result was, this is solving my problem, and my colleagues want in on this. Maybe there's a lot of people out there that need these kind of lubricants, and bingo bango, suddenly you've got a growing company. And it didn't happen overnight, but it started by solving a problem or a pain point, and we all have them. And I think I even described in the introduction an idea of or maybe I didn't. I'd have to think back on that now. But like, everybody experiences pain points, problems in their life, and that can be fertile ground, for lack of a better word, for ideas. Hopefully you all have a passion area. You're passionate about movies, or golf, or other sports, or music, or spending time with family. Whatever it is, you've got a passion or a hobby. That's a great area for business ideas to come out of. I'm thinking of Tap Out. That was Charles Unfortunately, Charles passed away in a tragic auto accident, but that was Charles' passion, was mixed martial arts. That's his whole life was like immersed in that. He loved that. And so that became the basis for the idea for the business. Same thing with, I've got several friends that own microbreweries, craft breweries. And, that really resulted out of the interest in, brewing beer, like having the hobby of brewing the beer. And so, that really becomes the basis for a starting point for a business, is tapping into those passions or hobbies that you have. Work experience. We all work. Well, I think most of us are working at this point in time. And so work experience becomes a powerful spot to sort of look around and say, you know what? I've never really thought about this way, but there might be some ideas for businesses here. And I'm going to provide some tangible ideas about what that work experience dynamic looks like when it comes to developing ideas here in a few minutes from now. Observation. I'm thinking back to a particular example of ideation in the context of observation. Years back, we had an author, Teresa Esser, who wrote a book called Venture Cafe. Really good book. She came out and talked to our students. And in the book, Teresa relates a story about her husband who started multiple tech companies. And they were on vacation in Europe. And they were, getting onto a train. And, a little boy dropped his ticket and it fell down into the grate. Lost forever, basically, and while Teresa was thinking, oh, that's too bad, and then sat down to think about what are we going to have for dinner when we get to Paris, and then when the train arrives in Paris. And her husband's immediately talking to her and ideating about, I've got this idea for a business that could solve this problem that we just witnessed, and so he was, I think most really good entrepreneurs are incredibly curious and observant, and they see a lot of what's happening around them. I forget who said it, might have been Jeff Timmons, that said entrepreneurs are superior at spotting opportunities because they're incredibly observant. So this is an area for ideation. Purposeful search. I'm going to describe that in more detail, but that's just where you say, I'd love to come up with an idea for a business, but I don't know what to do, so I'm going to start searching for ideas, trying to find inspiration in the world around me. Recycling is not throwing your cans and bottles into a particular container and having the truck take it away for recycling and keeping our environment greener. No, it's recycling is basically taking a concept and transporting it into a new context. And I'm going to give you some very specific examples about what that looks like. Reinvention is in this module. You're watching the video that features the company IDEO. The video is called The Deep Dive. And essentially what IDEO is doing is reinventing existing products. The grocery cart that you're going to see in the video is essentially a reinvented product. And so this also can be a fertile area for ideation. Tech transfer is an area where there is tons of really cutting edge, interesting research being done in university labs and government labs all around the country and in particular around the world. A lot of that technology just sits on the shelf. It goes nowhere. I've done extensive work with the Army Research Laboratory and the Naval Research Lab, and tons of that stuff sits on the shelf and never gets commercialized and never sees the light of day, never finds a commercial purpose. But tons of effort and time and patents were put into it, and there it sits. So tech transfer is a way to sort of identify these cool things that are sitting on the shelf and find a way to bring them to market. I'll give you some examples on that as well. I think this is last but not least is what I call STIR. That's an acronym. It stands for social and demographic change, technological change, industry change, and regulatory change. And where change is taking place is where ideas are, ideas for new businesses. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Okay, so I'm going to shift gears and go into each one of these areas and give you some what I think are pertinent examples. In the readings that you're doing, you're going to encounter the company OGIO. I think Michael Pratt was actually the founder of OGIO that had the issue with his gym bag not fitting in the gym locker, and he decided to solve that problem by coming up with a new gym bag design. So in some sense, this is kind of a combination of what I would call the pain point and reinvention, but it has its genesis in experiencing a problem. And so he solves that problem by coming up with a new product. Flavor X, also in the readings, is where you've got a child experiencing issues taking medicine that doesn't taste very good, and the medicine has to be taken at a certain time and in certain doses. And parents that experiencing this problem have had it up to here and decide we're going to take care of this problem, and they create a product called Flavor X. That's a pain point. That's pain. If your child needs medicine in a specific dosage at a specific time and you can't get it to them because the medicine doesn't taste good and they spit it up, that's a problem. Spanx, Sarah Blakely, a billionaire entrepreneur now, started with, trying to solve a problem that, realistically we all face, is that as we want to be looking good in public, and sometimes we don't look so good, and sometimes our clothes and our undergarments can make up for that. And so she solved that problem, originally solving it for women, but I know she's expanded into products for men as well, that takes care of this issue of, a personal problem. Let's put it that way. Last but not least, although the product is not around anymore, the company has become a casualty of competition and a variety of other things. Clemmie's ice cream was a 100% sugar-free, gluten-free, lactose-free ice cream that was developed by an entrepreneur I know because he was addicted to ice cream, and he went into his doctor, who basically said that you're on the verge of type 2 diabetes. The next time you come in, you got to clean this up, or this is bad news. And why are you this way? And he had to come clean with his addiction to ice cream. He said he was eating like a quart or a pint or something of ice cream every day. He's like, he just loved it. And so for a year or two, he tinkered around in the kitchen. In his kitchen, he bought a commercial ice cream maker, and he played around with ingredients, recipes, and finally came up with a way to make this ice cream and took it to market. But it all started because he was having health issues, and he was addicted to ice cream, and he wanted to have his ice cream and eat it too. So that's pain points. Moving on, passion or hobby. Examples of passion or hobby businesses. Well, Garner Holt, I mentioned him earlier. That was a passion thing for him. He was enthralled by Disneyland and the figures and the rides and all that stuff, and that's what he wanted his life to be like. He wanted to live that passion for animatronic figures and theme park entertainment. So as a result, you've got Garner Holt Productions. Jensen USA, started by Mike Jensen, he was a mountain biker. He was an avid biker. That's what he really wanted to do as a career. He wanted to be a professional cyclist, racing mountain bikes and things like that. And as a teenager, he started by repairing bikes out of his parents' garage. Then he graduated to selling parts for bikes, and then he graduated to sort of mail order, and then internet, and then it's morphed into Jensen USA, which is an incredibly large online retailer of bicycles and bicycle parts. But that was his passion. That's his hobby. He even relocated his business. He was originally, when I met Mike, he was in Ontario, and then he relocated to Riverside. And a big part of the reason why they chose the location they went to in Riverside was because it was right next to a sort of a nature preserve park area that had biking trails, mountain biking trails, and they could take their bikes out on lunch and after work and bike and have fun and test out products. And it really is a business that was started and built based on a passion or a hobby. So this is very fertile ground. Think about the things you love to do and you're passionate about in your life, and that tends to be a really, really fertile place to start ideating. Okay, so we move from passion or hobby to work experience. Working 9 to 5. We all have to, well, unless you're independently wealthy, I guess, we all have to punch the clock in some form or fashion. And so we spend an inordinate amount of our life at work. So think about your work as a place where ideas can strike you and flourish because you're paying attention, you're dialed in, you're thinking about ideas. Work experience. One of my favorite examples is a company called Aqueous Technologies, Mike Conrad. Mike was working for a company that made machines that cleaned circuit boards. If anybody's familiar with circuit boards, printed circuit boards, it's making those is an incredibly messy process. You have solder and components and all that stuff, and it's messy, and they have to be cleaned once they've been all the components have been soldered. And the company Mike worked for made the machines that cleaned these circuit boards. And in the old days, well, I'm out of the industry now. I was in the electronics industry for years, but use a lot of nasty chemicals. Putting it lightly, to clean these things. Things that are incredibly toxic for people and the environment. Those days where we didn't know any better. So Mike was working for this company, and he could see the change, the shift, the things happening in the industry and the world that said, we've got to be greener, we've got to be more conscious of how the footprint we're leaving. And he was looking at this and thinking, we've got, and some of these chemicals are eventually going to be outlawed. And so Mike was thinking ahead in his industry as just an employee for a company. And he went to his boss and essentially pitched the idea of coming up with a more environmentally friendly machine. And his boss wasn't receptive. And over time, Mike wore him down. And finally, his boss said, well, you can do it, but you can do it on your own time. So he did. They took it to a trade show, got great response, and his boss said, no, I just don't want, I don't want to do this. I don't think, and it's going to cannibalize our existing products, blah, blah, blah. So Mike said, screw this, I'm going off and starting my own. And this is all based on his experience of understanding the industry, understanding the customers, understanding the trends, and, and being innovative and creating a new product based on that experience. And his company has become incredibly successful. And if I remember the story, he put his old boss out of business. But that all started from work experience. Closer to home, in my particular instance, my family's business was a result of work experience. My father was both a pilot and a mechanic, and he was a maintenance officer in the military. And when he got out of the military, he kept working in the maintenance field and also flying. And he saw a need based on some of the experiences he was having for integrated communication systems in aircraft that would help the pilots and the crews communicate more effectively using multiple radios and those kind of things. And so the company Aircom Systems was born out of that work experience and understanding the industry, understanding the needs of the pilots and the mechanics, and understanding the technology and where things were headed. And so that company, which was launched in 1968, still exists today, although the family sold it, I think it's almost 5 years ago now. So still operating, still doing airborne audio communication systems. This is what we would call avionics manufacturing. But it came out of that work experience of being in the military, of being in the private sector, and working with aircraft and communication systems and maintenance issues and seeing those trends. So think about your own work experience. Step back, just sort of step back and pause this video, guided tutorial, and think about your work experience. I should have mentioned that in the beginning, that sometimes these guided tutorials are always better if you have an adult beverage handy. And if you get bored with me, you can always hit the pause button and go do something and come back further stimulated by whatever adult beverage you may have available. And if you don't drink, have a nice soda or water or tea or coffee. Next is purposeful searching, and this seems kind of an odd term, but the example I'm going to use here, and then hopefully it'll make it seem concrete enough, is Media Defender. Now, Media Defender was a company that was launched by two young men. They met each other when they started working for an aerospace company right out of college. And they decided early on, after kind of going through the onboarding and seeing what the aerospace industry was like and the burned out old engineers and that kind of stuff, and they said, we should really start our own company. And they did start one company, if I remember correctly. It didn't do so well, and they said, but we've got to try again. We've got to start something else. And they said, well, we really don't know what we want to start, though. We've kind of run out of ideas. So they literally started searching for ideas. And so they would talk to people, read papers, things like that. And so one day, Octavio was reading, I think it was the LA Times, and saw an article about the piracy problem in Hollywood. So the movies and the music that was being pirated, the DVDs and things like that. And so he took it to his partner and said, hey, here's a problem. This could be a business. If we could solve this problem, this could be a business. And I think his partner looked at him and said, we know nothing about piracy and computers. Neither one of them were engineers. And so it seems like a great idea, but how are we going to do this? And well, they figured out how to do it. They actually recruited some engineers they worked with. They tried to bring them on their team as equity partners, but the engineers said, no, we've got good jobs here at the aerospace company, but you can hire us in our spare time and we'll help you try and solve this problem. Well, ultimately they did. They came up with a solution that actually worked. And the long story short is that they ended up selling Media Defender for about, I think it was $43 million. And Octavio and his partner, I think, owned 90% of the company. They had gotten some startup capital from friends and family and given up some equity. I think one of their former professors as well helped fund the company. So as Octavio said to me at the time, he goes, it's funny, this all started from reading the paper, and now here I am like 3 or 4 years later, and I never have to work again if I don't want to. That's purposeful searching. Recycling. Here's the one, this throws people off a little bit. So I hopefully you understand it after I explain it. My favorite story of recycling is Starbucks. A worldwide phenomenon, obviously. But what is Starbucks? It's a coffee shop. It's just a place where people can have coffee and hang out. But if you really think about it, in the United States, prior to Starbucks, we didn't have this coffee shop. I mean, we had coffee shop diner type, places you go eat and you have a cup of coffee. And they call them coffee shops, but they weren't really coffee shops. And coffee was really just a commodity at the time in the United States. It was something you bought in a can, it was ground up and freeze dried or whatever they call that. I don't drink coffee, but I remember my parents, they'd bring their coffee home in a can, and brew it at home. You didn't have this really cool, interesting coffee with different blends and different styles. You didn't have this really cool social space in the United States at the time. Where you had it was in Italy. Howard Schultz visited Italy, saw this dynamic, saw that coffee was really a part of the culture, a part of the experience, much like the pubs are in the United Kingdom, where it's kind of part of the fabric of life, and that's where people socialize and hang out and unwind and do all that stuff. Well, Howard Schultz basically took the Italian coffee bar and recreated it in the United States, recycled it, took the concept and basically recycled it, transported it into our culture. And obviously you can see where we're at now with Starbucks. Another example of recycling would be Black Entertainment Television. Robert Johnson, that, basically, if I remember the story correctly, was talking to a guy in a cab. It was talking about creating a television network for senior citizens. And this is around the time that specialized television networks were starting to be created. And he thought, why not take that concept, sort of like CNN is the news thing. And you could have a senior citizen channel, and now let's have a channel that targets African Americans, a growing demographic, a powerful economic market, and so he's basically recycling, a concept, and I think that's the key of always trying to remember. I think for me, the biggest distinguishment, BET is not the best example, but I think Starbucks in that you're taking something from somewhere else and bringing it, whether it's bringing it to the U.S. or taking it from the U.S. and somewhere else. A few years back, I had a group of MBA students from Taiwan and China, and they basically wanted to take the American Girl concept of dolls here in the United States, and they wanted to recycle that. So they wanted to transport that and massage it and change it a little bit to match the Chinese market, and create the Chinese version, what they called Wawa Girl, the Chinese version of American Girl dolls. And they basically were, just some people have said, well, this is just copying. Well, it's copying, but it's in some sense it's recycling it because it is kind of transforming it a little bit. You're adapting it for the local market. But if you can think back to Starbucks and think that wasn't an American invention, that was something that was taken from somewhere else and brought over here. That's a good way of thinking about these recycling ideas. Reinvention. There are 2 videos that are in this experience segment of 621 that focus on reinvention. And the first is GoPro. And, Nick came up with the idea for his camera, and, really the light bulb went on, as you'll see in the video, when he's out doing the race car driving. But what is GoPro? I mean, it's a camera, right? But it's a camera that does things that cameras never did before, and were never and set up in a way that it's conducive to use in ways that have never been used before, in a user-friendly, easy way. So he's basically Nick didn't invent the camera; he's reinventing the camera. With regard to IDEO, you're watching the video called Deep Dive. IDEO is a company that essentially develops innovative products and reinvents things. And so, basically, the gist of the video, if you haven't already watched it, hopefully you haven't, because this is the introduction to the module, is that they're given the task of reinventing the shopping cart, and you'll see how they approach that. And you can see that businesses can result from this reinvention of things that are already out there. So you're not starting with a blank slate or a blank canvas. You're inventing, reinventing things that already exist, but giving them new purpose, new features, new facets that are going to appeal to a new market or expand the boundaries of what these products can ultimately do. Tech transfer is, as I mentioned before, there's tons of businesses that come out of existing technologies, and the technologies are often commercialized mostly by people that didn't develop the technologies. So, a good example is Kite, this fighting the issues that we have with mosquitoes and trying to stop mosquito bites and the spread of malaria and diseases, all these nasty things. But over at UC Riverside, they've developed a multitude of innovative approaches to trying to basically stop mosquitoes from sensing humans, and and if they can't find the humans and bite them, they're not going to spread malaria and all these other nasty things. And so, but that technology was developed at UC Riverside by researchers and was commercialized, so transferred and commercialized by a private company that's taking these products to market. So they didn't develop the technology. They are licensing the technology from the university or from the people that have the intellectual property, the patents, and taking it to market. So if that didn't happen, that would still be sitting on the shelf. Probably my favorite example is, because I was involved in this project, was the hearing pill. And I'm not sure what's happened and where they're at right now. But the hearing pill was a technology, basically a pill that was patented by the Navy as a result of issues they were having with hearing loss in the military. Now, if you've ever been around those big guns and cannons on ships and in the the Army artillery, those big things, those things are incredibly loud, and every one of the folks that works around those has to have earphone, earplugs, things to protect their ears. My son was in charge of an artillery unit, and he said, what they give you helps, but it doesn't stop. You suffer hearing damage as a result of being so close to these weapons. And that costs money, and it causes all kinds of problems. So the Navy came up with a pill that, if taken within a certain period of time after the hearing trauma, or maybe it was right before, I can't remember all the details, it would mitigate the hearing loss. And that technology kind of was sitting on the shelf, and a company in California identified it and took it to market. And Cal State San Bernardino, through one of our tech transfer programs, we actually funded the research on it and part of the clinical trials to take that to market. And this particular product, the hearing pill, has multiple applications. It's more than just obviously the military. You think about heavy industry and music industry and things like that, where hearing loss is pretty prevalent. But it won a national tech transfer award. But again, you think back, if somebody hadn't identified that, found some commercial potential, and taken the risk and ventured into the unknown, that product doesn't exist. It just sits on the shelf. It's another patent that's not being used. So tech transfer. And there's a lot of ways to go, and you can literally, most labs or universities have tech transfer websites where you can actually go, and by keyword search, you can see what kind of technologies they have available, what kind of research has been done, what's been patented, and who to contact if you're interested in having a conversation about commercializing that technology. All right, stir. We're going to stir up the pot here. Two examples, I think, relevant here. If you're thinking about social change, demographic change, technological change, industry change, regulatory change, where change is taking place, things are happening, and opportunities are open, and that's a fertile area for ideas. McDonald's, if you think about it, is really the result of social and demographic changes. When did McDonald's happen? In the 50s. What was going on? Post-World War II. America economically doing well, lots of social change. Who was working during World War II? Who was driving the production of the factories? Mostly females. Did they want to necessarily stay home after that? You get a taste of making money, independence, a career. You have all these social changes taking place. You have the advent of the freeway system, cars, economic prosperity, lots of things, lots of changes taking place. People wanting food quicker, and so you've got McDonald's popping up out of that quagmire of change. More tangible and concrete would be the regulatory changes. Southwest Airlines really, essentially launched and blossomed because of the deregulation of the airline industry. So think about other industries. Think about California with all of our clean air mandates. How many companies have blossomed, thrived, grown because of the need for mitigating air pollution. So think about all these regulatory, industrial changes, technological changes. Without the technological changes and the advancing semiconductors and miniaturization of things, we don't have things like iPhones and tablets and watch, the Apple Watch and things like that. That's technological changes are driving that, and there are ideas there for businesses. All right, so that's pretty much all the areas where you come up with ideas. Not all, but that's a taste of them. But it still leads me to the fundamental premise of ideation, which is the best way to come up with ideas, with a good idea really, is to have lots of ideas. And I may have mentioned that, in a typical undergrad class where we're dealing with ideation, I'll have the students they'll do 100 ideas. And then the next time they do 50 ideas, and then the next time they do 25 ideas, and then the next time they do 10, and then they pick their top idea from the 10 that they want to pursue. And they think, wow, why are we coming up with so many ideas? And I tell them up front, the best way to come up with a good idea is to have lots of ideas. And it doesn't really resonate until they go through coming up with 100 ideas. And then when we do a debrief after that first 100, they sit down and they say, I ask them, so how many good ideas did you have in that? And most of them, if they're being honest, they'll say only a handful, if that. They'll say a lot of these really aren't that good. And I said, there you go. If you come up with 5 ideas, how many of them are going to be good? Maybe one, but maybe none. But if you're generating lots of ideas, you're more likely to have some good ones in there. So the best way to come up with a good idea is to have lots of ideas. So some more thoughts about ideation. If you're looking at this, a good question was asked. It's like, what are the traits, what are the things that lead to good ideation, or what are some aspects of ideation that you could elaborate on? Because you're doing those big idea exercises, and how am I going to be successful in this? And so I've thrown a few keywords up on the screen, and maybe I'll just go through them one by one. But realistically, ideation is not something that most of us sit down and do routinely. It's not a part of our daily lives. A lot of us don't feel like we're that creative to begin with. It's not a habit. It's not a routine that we're in of being creative. Some may be. But very rarely do I run into people that say, oh yeah, I come up with ideas every day. I'm ideating every day. But I think you can. And I think a lot of that's driven by, one, making it a habit. It's like anything. You're going to get better at it, and you're going to be more productive at it the more you do it. Experience. So I tell my students, if you really want to get good at coming up with ideas, you have to make it a habit. You have to be committed to ideating. Let me say that again. You have to be committed to ideating. You have to be passionate about doing it. You have to want to do it. So you have to make it a habit. The second piece of it I think is really important is you've got to find your spot. What do I mean by that? Well, finding your spot is simply, where do you ideate the best? For everybody, it's going to be something different. I mean, there's going to be a place on this wonderful earth that exists for us. There's a place where you can be your most creative and you can ideate at the highest level. For me personally, that ideation happens with frequency, with regularity, in abundance, when I'm away from the normal constraints and demands of my day-to-day life. And so where I find myself being the most creative is when I'm traveling to a new place, when I'm traveling on business, when I'm at conferences, when I get away from the shackles of my work and I have some breathing room. That's when the ideas for me start flowing like it's unbelievable. It's like the spigot has been opened. Now there's other places that I have, there's other spots I have. I can come up with ideas when I'm walking. I'm thinking of one songwriter I know who basically says, and this is, he was interviewed and he said, my best song ideas come when I'm walking. I'm out, it's beautiful, sun shining, fresh air, no distractions. I can clear my head and stuff just comes in. It's like magic. So the key is finding that spot. What is that spot for you? And it's going to be different for everybody. Another key aspect of ideation is just feeling curious. Just be open to being curious about things. Some people are naturally curious. Others have to kind of, curate that themselves. So curiosity, I think, is a really, really big piece of this ideation puzzle. But be interested. Ask questions. Why does this work? How does that work? I wonder why that's happening. You see things happening in the world around you, and oftentimes we don't question them. We don't pay attention. I'm going to talk about that as we look at the attentiveness. But this idea of curiosity is really, really important. Be curious. I mean, we were all curious. I think most children are curious. And then over time, maybe some of that kind of gets driven out of us. I don't know. That's be worth discussing, I think. Bridging to attentiveness. This is key here. Literally, we get, and I've experienced this myself personally, we get on autopilot in life. We get into a routine, we do things a certain way, we follow certain patterns, and realistically our brain to function is actually creating a lot of shortcuts for us. And so we sometimes aren't very attentive. And in ways that manifests itself is I use in my face-to-face class, because it's an interactive thing that you have to do in real time, I use a video where, and you've probably seen this, it's become very popular now, so it's harder to use it. A video of students passing a basketball back and forth. There's two teams. One team's wearing white shirts, one team's wearing black shirts. And the task for the students is to count the number of times the basketball is passed by the white team. And they sit there and they watch that, and at the end they give the answers, and they come up with lots. We had everything from 11 to 21 passes. It's all over the board. And at the end of the day, I tell them, well, they'll ask me, well, what's the right answer? I said, I don't know. I wasn't watching. I wasn't really counting. I don't know. And I said, but did anybody see anything unusual in the video? And usually in a class of 28, about 3 to 5 people raised their hand and said, yes, I saw something unusual. Hold that thought. Don't tell me what you saw. Let's watch the video again. And we'll watch the video again, and in the middle of the video, when they're not focused, when they're not really deeply focused on the task at hand, when their brain's not on autopilot, they see the gorilla that walked into the picture and beat his chest or her, and then walked back out. And they're embarrassed. They're sheepish. I didn't see that. I can't believe I missed that. Well, because you're so focused that you block out all the white noise around you. And that's how it is in our daily lives. We are so focused, not all of us, but many of us are so focused that we block out that wonderful stuff that's happening around us. In some ways, our brain is doing that too. Its mechanism of coping is to block out some of that stuff that isn't important. But that's where the real richness is happening. Things are happening around us that we don't realize. And some of those can be ideas for businesses. So I remember a student coming back to me later, and he said, "You've ruined me forever by this exercise." He goes, "Because I'm really paying attention every day." He said, "And I'm seeing all kinds of things, and I'm coming up with all kinds of ideas, and it's driving me nuts." He goes, "I've never been so attentive in my life." And we all do, we all fall into this trap. I'm guilty of it too. I mean, how many of you guys have left, how many have you left work, gotten in the car and turned out of the driveway and headed in a direction that you normally head every day, but you really didn't want to do that day because you needed to go to the store in a different direction? But you were just almost hardwired, programmed, autopilot. You made that left turn instead of the right turn. Happens to me, not with amazing frequency, but it happens at least a couple times a year. So we got to battle against this autopilot thing and be more attentive. Innovation. Think innovation. When you're ideating, how can I be different, unique, do something different? Peter Drucker. I didn't assign any Peter Drucker readings in this cycle of the class or this time where we're doing the class. I have in the past. But Peter Drucker argued that innovation is the heart of entrepreneurship, that without innovation, you don't have entrepreneurship. And so innovation should be a part of your ideation. How can I be different, unique, groundbreaking? Creativity is hard for a lot of us. A lot of people don't think they're very creative, but it's a key aspect of ideation. You really have to be creative. And I think the key with creativity and ideation is that you need to ideate. You need to embrace just ideating and trying to be creative and generate wild ideas, and don't judge your ideas. Don't censor your ideas. Everybody has a tendency to come up with an idea and then find 10 ways why that's a bad idea. You self-censor. My phrase is ideate, don't evaluate. Ideate, don't evaluate. You can evaluate later. We'll come back to evaluating ideas later. But you'll see this in the IDEO video. They generate wild ideas. That's the starting point. No idea is too wild. You generate wild ideas and you build from there. That's the starting point. So open yourself up to that creative mindset. Open yourself up to being wildly, stupidly creative, crazy ideas, this would never work. That's the starting point. Generate those wild ideas. Don't censor yourself. Ideate, don't evaluate. And then lastly, my thoughts about ideation from experience and working with students is this is hard work. Ideation is not something where it just happens. And occasionally you can get into a groove and it can flow and all that stuff. That's great. But it is hard work. And if you don't approach it as something you're going to put some elbow grease into, you're going to be less likely to be successful in coming up with ideas. So probably that's enough about ideation. So I'm going to switch gears really quickly and hit on the blue ocean concept. We were talking about innovation being a key part of entrepreneurship. You're going to tackle the blue ocean readings, and just really quickly as a primer, blue oceans are about creating uncontested market space, making the competition irrelevant. You're basically trying to tap into new demand instead of exploiting existing demand. This is I've been dealing with this strategy for a lot of years, and I'm enthralled by it. I think it's got a lot of value to understand and use, and I actually use this. I use the core principles of blue ocean in how I run programs and do things. So if you think about the blue ocean in practical terms, the examples you're going to see in the readings are Cirque du Soleil and Nintendo Wii. And basically, to me, those are the really easy examples of the blue ocean strategy in practice. And if we want to maybe just quickly kind of dig into what Nintendo did that makes it a blue ocean company, is look at, we all know what Nintendo Wii is, right? The motion gaming, really cool game that you can do the bowling, the fitness, all that stuff. But, and you've seen here, actually let me back up to the prior picture. Those are young women playing the game. Obviously these are older people playing the game. And then, you've got sort of families. And that's the real interesting part of the Nintendo Wii equation as it relates to blue ocean. When we talk about creating new market space, one of the other things that we use when we talk about when we talk about blue ocean is this idea of attracting non-users, people that haven't used a particular product before, but now they're attracted. And so think about Nintendo in the scheme of PS3, Xbox 360, Nintendo Wii. They appealed to non-gamers. Xbox, PS3, those are hardcore gaming platforms. Hardcore gamers tend to be young males, and they're looking for a specific experience. Well, how is Nintendo different and also low cost? Because that's the trade-off that companies typically make, is you can either be differentiated or you can be low cost. Well, Blue Ocean Strategy says you can do both. Thank you very much. We'll just combine those two elegantly and have an incredible advantage. So Nintendo Wii appealed to non-gamers. Those three pictures I showed you, young women, older people, and families. People that didn't traditionally play video games. Now, I'm not saying that there weren't exceptions, but by and large, that's not the market for these gaming platforms. Historically, it wasn't. PS3 and Xbox, they weren't targeting those markets. Their market was hardcore gamers. So this platform appealed to non-gamers. Historically, people that were not customers. I vividly remember, my daughter, who never really wanted to play video games, my nieces went to visit them at Christmas right when Wii was coming out. They got a Wii, and we spent a week, and it was a week. Get the pun there? A week. That's all we did that week was play Wii. And they had never had any interest in video games. But the motion gaming experience, unique, basically attracted them. Senior citizens playing the game, families gaming together because of the interactivity, the fun of it. they really created a whole new market based on non-gamers. They appealed to non-gamers through a unique experience, different from what was on the market already. That's the differentiation piece. But how did they get to the low cost piece? Well, hardcore gamers want incredible graphics, speed, the latest, greatest, all that hot stuff. Non-gamers don't care about that. So Nintendo Wii could be lower cost. I'm not talking about lower price, I'm talking about lower cost. They were ultimately were a lower price point, but they were lower cost because they didn't have the intensive graphics, which takes those really hardcore chips, a lot of programming, software coding, all that stuff. They were able to reduce the platform costs dramatically because they didn't need that. And that cost reduction, of that among many little cost reductions, allowed them to be different and low cost. So they're lower cost. At that time, video game platforms, they were basically selling those at cost, or in some cases a loss leader, trying to make it up on the game licensing, game platforms and the game licensing and things like that. So Nintendo Wii, they had a lower cost to produce. They were still selling it at a great price point where they were making a good gross margin. They cost reduction by eliminating features and things that weren't necessarily necessary for the gamers that were really buying that system. So they made a lot of really interesting, for lack of a better word, bets, bringing this product to market. But that's a good example of a blue ocean strategy applied. It ties in. Here's where I also assigned the value innovation article because that's the core of the blue ocean approach. It's what I call rice. I love rice, whether it's basmati rice or brown rice or, any other kind of rice. I love rice. But what's rice in the context of this? You can think about what your favorite rice is. Hopefully you're not hungry right now, because if you are like me, you're thinking about food and dinner. But rice is essentially this. It's an acronym for reduce, increase, create, and eliminate. So basically, the core of the blue ocean is constructed on these four fundamental questions. What factors that we take for granted could be reduced below the industry standard? In other words, what are people doing now that if we do less of, it's not going to soften the value proposition, and the customers won't miss it? What should we be raising above the industry standard? What's the standard? What's the standard now that we need to raise, and it's going to create more value and people are going to love it? What do we need to create? What factors should be created that never has been offered by the industry? And then lastly, what should we get rid of? What things could we eliminate that the customer doesn't really care about, but it's just, we've been stuck. We're stuck. Nobody wants to be the first one to get rid of it. And so if you think about it, Nintendo Wii reduced obviously they reduced the graphics. They're not high level graphics on that platform. They reduced it. They increased the experience of the game, but they created the motion gaming. And, so you can look at these different blue ocean companies. You look at things like Accor Hotels, which is a great example of a blue ocean company as well. If you look them up and type Accor Hotels Blue Ocean on Google, ask Professor Google to tell you about that. Gives you some real insight into how they apply this framework of RICE, reducing, increasing, creating, eliminating, asking these questions of themselves, of customers, people in the industry, to get to the point where they can craft a new business that is a blue ocean, uncontested market space where the competition's irrelevant, and you have an incredible head start. Ultimately, right, everybody's going to catch up. It's going to become red again. But wouldn't you like to have a 6-month, year, 2-year, 4 years head start? That's nirvana. So that's the core of the blue ocean approach, the RICE. So always remember RICE. Okay. Really quickly, I just want to say, because I don't think I assigned anything reading-wise, but businesses focused on solving problems have probably the greatest potential. I mean, if you think about pain points, realistically, in the context of things, when we think about startups are about finding customers. not about building products or services. They're about finding customers. And when we talk about customers, they don't typically buy products or services. What are they buying? They're buying something that solves a problem. They're buying solutions. The best businesses solve problems so they're focused on solving problems that have great potential. The problem is defining the problem. So that sounds odd, but it is. Defining the problem and its scale is really, really critical. So as you're thinking about problems, and maybe you've got an idea that you think you can solve a problem, you have to ask yourself, who has the problem? Because oftentimes we have the problem, it's personal, it's a personal pain point, and then you have to ask yourself, well, I have the problem, but do other people have the problem as well? How much of a problem really is this? And then you have to ask yourself, is it really a substantive problem, or is it something that's just kind of minimal? And we think of that from the perspective of, is this a headache or is it a migraine, right? I don't have migraines, but my wife does. And, she talks about them in terms that are not glowingly positive. In fact, they're incredibly negative. And it's an incredible health issue. And she'll say, I just want to, I just want to cut my head off. It's so bad. And she has to take medication and all those wonderful things. And so, the solution for a migraine is something that if you have something, give it to me. The migraine is a pressing problem that needs to be solved, and I'll pay just about anything to have it solved for me, versus just a little minor headache where you go, you know what, I can live with it. Not a big deal. I don't even need an aspirin. I'll just deal with it. So think about who has the problem, how much of a problem is it, and is it a headache or a migraine problem? And migraines are the problems you want to find, because they're the ones that have the most pain, and people are going to really want to solve it. And then you have to think about who's got the most benefit from a solution. Sometimes the problem may be shared by lots of people, but who's going to benefit the most from a solution? I'm thinking, we do it in my face-to-face class. We sit down and we do a traffic. We talk about traffic in metropolitan areas like Los Angeles, and we sit up and we start by defining like who experiences traffic, and we put like a lot of people up on the board that experience the traffic problem. And then we say, well, if we had a solution for traffic, easing traffic, who benefits the most? And most importantly, who can pay for a solution? And then lastly, will they pay for the solution? So you have to, once you get past ideation and you start grappling with the viability of the idea, of the potential opportunity, which I'm going to talk about in a second, you have to start talking about these kind of things. But particularly when we're dealing with problems or ideas that address problems or pain points, you really have to know who has the problem, how much of a problem is it really a migraine, who's going to benefit, who's going to pay for it, and will they actually pay? I always think back to every year since I've been at Cal State, every year, without exception, every stinking year, students in my class come up with a solution for the parking problem here on campus. And one of the solutions, the historical every year solution, is valet parking. We're going to have valet parking on campus. Somebody should create a business for valet parking. And so we have to ask, who has the problem? Well, faculty, staff, students. How much of a problem is it? Well, for students, it's a big problem. Is it a migraine? Yeah. Who's going to benefit the most from the solution? Well, probably the students, because they come and go more than we do. We park once a day, basically. They may have a couple different times they're on campus. Who can pay for a solution? Well, that's where the problem starts to hit some rocky shores, because they find out after talking to students and doing extensive research that the people who can pay for a solution are not the students. The students may be able to pay for a solution, but when they get down to it, they won't pay for a solution. They think it's too costly. And so you have to think about these things as you're grappling with problem-oriented ideas. Okay, shifting gears again. I just alluded to it. How do you know? You come up with ideas, and I told you, ideate, don't evaluate. I was hearing you guys repeat that back. That's why I kept that pause there, because I could hear you repeating it back. The mantra, ideate, don't, yes, evaluate. How do you know if your business idea is any good? Well, that's the rub, right? You come up with tons of ideas. I said it takes a lot of ideas to come up with a great idea. Well, how do you know it's a great idea? Well, of course, everybody thinks their ideas are great, right? Initially, but if you're honest, a lot of your ideas suck. I'm honest, a lot of my ideas suck. Um, how do you know if it's any good? And the key is here. Everybody tells me. I get people come up to me all the time saying, "I've got a great idea, Mike. What do you think?" And my thing is always, well, it sounds interesting, um, but there's some things you need to think about. And one is there a customer that needs what you will provide and is willing to pay for it? It goes back to what I said before. Startups aren't about building products or services. It's about finding customers. Next if there is a customer there that's willing to buy your solution or really has a strong need for what you're providing, are there a lot of those customers? Preferably a large group of customers, preferably growing. So is there a reachable and attractive market? So a lot of customers aggregated up, that's a market, right? So one, is there a customer that's willing to pay for it? So two, are there a lot of those people? And is the market that they represent growing, declining, whatever? You need to think about it. You need to understand what these things are. You have to be able to think about the business model and can it support the company? And in this Entrepreneurship 621, you're going to be doing the business model canvas. So you're going to be looking at what it would take on a number of different dimensions for this business to really be an opportunity. So you need to think about the business model. And when we talk about business models, and we're going to talk a little bit more, we're really talking about how a company does things and how it makes money. But it's also the financial piece. Can it be sustainable? The fourth piece is the timing issue. Is the timing right? And I'm not just talking about from a market perspective, like is the window of opportunity opening or closing. I'm talking also about personal perspective. Is the timing right for you? That's something only you can determine. But I talk to a lot of people that are smart. They think about, is the timing right for them? I remember one of my students years ago, she said, "I'd love to start a business, but I really want to start a family, right? And I don't think I want to go through this whole entrepreneurship thing, trying to juggle family and all that stuff." She goes, maybe later. But for me personally, the timing is not right. It's not a good fit at this point. And the last piece, and this is really simplified, is just trying to get you thinking initially about how you know whether your idea is any good or not, is do you have the expertise and are you mentally ready for this undertaking? And if you don't have the expertise, do you know how to get the expertise? I'm thinking back to my media defender example where I was talking about the purposeful searching. And Octavio and his partner, they didn't have the expertise to figure out how to combat DVD and music piracy. So they looked around and they said, well, who has that expertise? Who could possibly have that? Well, we're working with a lot of engineers here. And so they coerced, they ultimately had to hire a couple of their engineering colleagues from the aerospace firm to work, to moonlight for them, to work in their spare time to help them develop a solution for that problem. Neither Octavia or partner were technologists. That wasn't their bailiwick. They didn't have the expertise, but they figured out how to get it. And they were mentally ready for the challenge. And you have to be ready for that. This is an experience like no other. It is exhilarating, demanding, draining. Name the adjective. It probably exists in undertaking a new business. Those of you in this course that have done it know exactly what I'm talking about. You have to be mentally and emotionally stable and ready for this. Because if you're not, it'll eat you alive. And so you need to think about that when you're looking at your ideas. Is my idea any good? Well, customer, market, business model, timing, do I have what it takes to do this? And it gets a little bit more complicated than that, but that's ultimately it. It's these are what I call my 5 basics of testing an idea and seeing if it's an opportunity. I'm going to go back to another phrase I'm fond of, which is entrepreneurs are not fortune tellers. Entrepreneurs are not trying to predict the future. Understanding whether your idea is any good, it takes detective work. It really A lot of people think you don't need to do any research because it's a sure thing. Well, you need to do some kind of detective work because you're really trying to minimize the risk. I mentioned this in some responses in discussion, that what we really think more about entrepreneurs now is that they're mitigators. They're trying to mitigate risk. They're willing to take risk. They have a higher propensity to take risk than the average person. Their risk tolerance level is a little bit higher, but they're willing to take the risk, but they're going to try and do everything they can to stack the odds in their favor. And so they're going to do the detective work. They're going to figure out whether this is a sure thing by doing some kind of a feasibility study, maybe a business plan, or maybe employ one of the several startup models that I'm going to discuss in Experience 3. There's got to be some kind of due diligence. It's just, I use this example with my undergraduate students. You fall in love with your idea, and you just run and start a business. That's foolish. And I tell them, you wouldn't fall in love with somebody at a party, go out on a date and then get married, because that's a recipe for disaster. You have to have some dating process, asking questions, probing, finding out whether this is the right fit. That's the detective work. However you do it, one of the things we recommend is interviewing tons of customers in an open-ended way, so you're not asking leading questions, but you're finding out whether what you're going to do, what you're proposing to do, actually resonates with potential customers. And that can be done as part of feasibility study. You can do it part of your business planning, although business plans are kind of outdated now. Or you can use some of the startup models that we're going to talk about, which is, the most salient right now is the lean startup, and we're going to that will come in Experience 3. So I'm just giving you a teaser there. But the gist of this is there has to be some detective work, because if there's not, you're flying blind. And if you don't think you need it, that this is a sure thing, I can point to you probably 9.9 times out of 10, that's going to be a disaster. There are going to be instances where it was a sure thing, they took the risk and it worked out without much forethought, but that tends to be the sort of the minority instance. It doesn't happen as often as people might think. Okay, next steps in this particular experience section of the class is, get warmed up by the videos, GoPro and several other videos. Embrace Baby Warmer is a really cool video. Complete the readings. Get into the ideation exercises, the big ideas 1, 2, and 3. Jump into the discussion forum and share your ideas and thoughts about all the materials. And then once you're done with the ideation, go ahead if you want and share, out of all the ideas you came up with, share the one you're most excited about. And you don't have to do this, but I think it's cool because I like to see what people have come up with and what they think. Because oftentimes, some of the ideas I think are their best are not the ones that they're most excited about, and vice versa. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic. So if you have the time and you want to do that, that would be great. And just to remind you about the ideation process, I put it in the description, and I think I've mentioned this before, but remember that minimum means minimum. Minimum effort means minimum effort. And if you think minimum, you think average, and you think average on a scale of A, B, C, D, E, F, you're thinking about C. For me, an average performance by a student in a class, that's C. So you want to strive, if possible, if that's what you want, go beyond the minimum. And I think that's clearly delineated in the instructions to the big idea assignments, but I just want to reinforce that. So I hope you enjoy experience number 2 and have fun with the ideation. Remember, ideate, don't evaluate. And I'm looking forward to seeing the discussions. If you have any questions, again, like I said before, don't suffer in silence. Reach out. I scheduled office hours for the first week, and I'm going to put basically an open Zoom meeting for each experience module. So there'll be one for this module all the way through the end of the class that can be used as a time to just discuss or ask questions with me. and we may get into a group discussion, who knows. But it's just time if you want to interact in a synchronous way, because all these online classes tend to be mostly asynchronous. If you want to be synchronous with me and some of your classmates, join that office hours thing. It'll be like an hour, 45 minutes to an hour. So it's optional. You don't have to. But if you want to, that's great. It's fun for me to do it. And then 2, if you need help from me personally, reach out to me, message me on Schoology, text me, call me, set up a separate meeting if you want to discuss something, and we'll go from there. I'm looking forward to seeing your ideas. I hope you enjoy this experience too, and I will reconnect with you if you're in the office hours, or I will talk with you again on the discussion board or the introduction to the next experience. So until then, good luck and have fun.